Non-Monogamy Help is a podcast where your questions about open, non-monogamous or polyamorous relationships are answered. Our host, Lola Phoenix, will consult a licensed therapist with over a decade of experience to address your problems. Names and locations have been changed or censored to keep your questions anonymous. You're listening to Non-Monogamy Help, the podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 23 of Non-Monogamy Help. I'm Lola Phoenix. Please send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com and they'll either be read in the podcast or the column anonymously. You're more than welcome to select which one you would prefer. You can read the columns and get the podcasts at nonmonogamyhelp.com. You can sign up to our newsletter and get them a few days before they go live by going to tinyletter.com/non-monogamy-help. You can also follow us on Twitter at non-monogamy-help for updates. And if you want to be amazing, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Lola Phoenix. Folks who pledge $5 or more a month will have their names read at the end of the podcast if they so wish. So before I get to this week's letter, I'm going to go through the discussion topic for this week, which you're welcome to share with partners, friends, anyone that you want to get to know more. So this week's discussion topic, and I'm editing it a little bit because it's a little bit binary. The question is, what slightly unhealthy things feel attractive in a partner? How might this relate to your relationships with your parents? So usually with the discussion questions, I try to answer the question for myself, just to give you a little bit of context. So for me, I think that a slightly unhealthy thing that feels attractive in someone that I might romantically consider, I think saying, in a partner is a bit of a stretch for me, but I think for me, protectiveness, or because protectiveness can sometimes go from being protective to being possessive and being a bit territorial, which I think can become unhealthy. I don't think being protective in and of itself is unhealthy, but then I kind of would say that because I think I lean towards being really protective of people that I care about. But I tend to, and I'm thinking about kind of like more fictional characters, because I don't necessarily get attracted to people in my vicinity very frequently. So generally speaking, when I find myself romantically interested in a person or in the idea of a person, they tend to be someone who is really protective of the people that they care about. And I think that relates, the specific question on the card is how it relates to your quote-unquote opposite sex parent. And I think that sometimes when society tells us that we not only share an identity with a parent, but that we're meant to mirror them, then sometimes that has something to do, what we find attractive has something to do with the relationships we're told we should expect to have. But, you don't always necessarily end up being attracted to the same identity that society says you should be. So I think how that kind of relates to my relationships with both of my parents is just that, in general, growing up, I didn't necessarily feel prioritized or protected. So when someone does make me a priority or thinks that I'm worth protecting, that is a huge thing. So I think that's why I kind of get drawn into that. And I just kind of need to be aware that sometimes protectiveness can be smothering. There's a really amazing song called Let Me Be Your Armor, and I can't remember who it's by, but it's a really funny song, because when you're listening to it at first, if you're if you have this kind of thing like I have, then you're kind of like, oh my gosh, this feels amazing and this is exactly what I like. But the song has a bit of a twist, and I won't spoil that for you, but it basically shows you how overprotectiveness isn't great, and it is sometimes stifling and sometimes isn't about protecting you, so and it's more about having control over you. Let me just search for it. Let me be your, I think it's by Assemblage 23. It's a tech song. Yeah, Assemblage 23, so look up that song. So yeah, that's for me. So I'll ask the question again, and again, you can ask this with your friends or your partners or whoever you want to get to know more. What slightly unhealthy things feel attractive in a partner, and how does this relate to your relationships with your parents? Deep this week. We're going deep. Anyway, I'm going to get to this week's question. Thanks. I'm in a poly relationship. My current girlfriend started to have feelings for someone else, and we decided it was allowed for us to have a polyamorous relationship for a short term of time. I've met this girl, and her personality is my complete opposite, so I didn't like her. Rough exterior, and her actions of making fun of the relationship I'm in by telling me I'm not enough. And every time she doesn't get her way, she goes suicidal. So my girlfriend has been pressuring me more and more so she could spend more time with her and extend the period of which we're doing this. She still chooses to have me in the picture. It seems like psychological abuse, and I feel stuck in between a relationship with my girlfriend and babysitting an unstable woman. My girlfriend hasn't told anyone about her, but everyone in the girl's life knows about the situation. And as much as everything feels like my girlfriend is pushing me away, I have to put on a smile for family events or friendly gatherings. How do I end this relationship? I love my girlfriend, and I know she loves me too. I just don't want to keep dealing with the insecurities and harm this other girl brings and the guilt trip she gives my girlfriend. So, there are a few things in here that are very big red flags that I want to point out, which I kind of feel like you already know are red flags. It's fine if you don't like the person that your partner wants to date. That's fine. That's, you know, for some people that's not ideal, but this kind of goes beyond that. Like, it's not just that you don't get along, it's that she makes fun of you, or she makes fun of the relationship you have with your girlfriend and tells you you're not enough. And then you say if she doesn't get her way, which I don't necessarily know what that means, but she becomes suicidal at certain points. You know, if you had said that she becomes suicidal at certain points, it would be one thing, because quite a lot of people do deal with suicidal ideations, and it is a difficult thing for some people to be able to know how to respond to. But the fact that not only does she make fun of your relationship, make fun of you, tells you that you're not enough, really, really bothers me in this situation. Like you say, it seems like psychological abuse, and it is very much looking like psychological abuse in this situation. Unfortunately, when it comes to someone in an abusive relationship, forcing your girlfriend to leave this other person, or trying to force her, will not work, because essentially you become just like the person who's abusing her. You're trying to force her to do things. You're trying to guilt trip her into doing things, and that will never work. And it's really difficult for a lot of people who are either in relationships with or who are friends and family of someone who is in an abusive situation. You also should not be expected to sit back and take this or deal with this. Like, you, by sitting back and not doing anything about it, also won't necessarily help the situation, because it just allows this person to continue to manipulate your partner. I would suggest, and I do recommend this book quite often to a lot of different people, there's a book called Why Does He Do That by Lundy Bancroft. And although the title is gendered, Lundy Bancroft does realize that anyone can be abusive, but just that the title is kind of more about his experience working specifically with abusive men. But I do think that book would be incredibly valuable to you, both in recognizing abusive patterns and also helping you cope with the situation and understand what is helpful when you're in this situation and what isn't. If you can get your girlfriend to read it, even better, but I don't necessarily think that her other partner will react to that book very well. What you can do in this situation, other than saying, you know what, I can't deal with this, I'm gone, is you can set very, very firm boundaries. And this is something that anyone can do, even when they just don't get along or don't like their metamour. This is actually even something that monogamous people can do if, you know, their partner's best friend, they can't stand them. I mean, it is very worrying to me. I will kind of highlight before I go into this that your girlfriend, you know, when it's one thing to have partners who don't get along, it's another for one partner to say that the other partner isn't enough. That's a personal attack, and your girlfriend really shouldn't put up with that. Like, compartmentalization is one thing, and I get that, you know, different people, different relationships, but when one person, you know, even, I don't know, to me as a person, I've always been mystified by people who can compartmentalize things as such to where they can be best friends with someone who has been nasty and disgusting to other people that they claim to be friends with. I don't get that. That's not how I am. That's not how I operate. Generally speaking, if I consider someone a friend, anyone who attacks them or hurts them is not going to be my friend. And I don't understand, you know, friend, let alone alone partner. So I don't really understand people who can do that. I'll give a little bit of credit to your girlfriend, because if she is in a psychologically abusive relationship, even if she does feel like that the girl shouldn't attack you, she may just not have any, she may be too scared to say anything, because as you said, if she is prone to using suicidal threats as a means of control, then that may be what will happen, and she might not want that to happen. But what you can do in this situation is you can set some very, very firm boundaries. You don't really say what the living situation here is, like if your girlfriend lives with you, how close this other girlfriend lives, but you can say, you know what, if you share a place together, you can say, I don't really want this person in my house. You can ask because you don't need to babysit this person, as you said, and you can say, I don't want to hear anything about her. I don't want to, you can come to me if you are scared or if you are feeling upset, but I don't want to be the person who can give you advice because I can't. And it's okay to set that boundary. Like one time, a person I was dating was really good friends with someone who was a total jerk to me. And that was fine. But when my partner would bring them up in conversation, I'd be like, I don't really want to hear about this person. And maybe that seems extreme to some people, but if the opposite is that you end up holding in all this resentment and it sours the relationship anyway, because you haven't set that boundary and you haven't said, I don't want to hear about this person. Please don't talk to me about them because I don't like them, and it's only going to create resentment if you sort of force me to have to deal with this person. It seems quite cold and it seems quite harsh, but sometimes I do think that people have to reach a kind of point where they can reckon what the abusive relationship is doing, and sometimes that can lead to that. Now, it's really important that you do this in a loving way, and that's why I recommend that book, because it really shows you like how to enforce these kind of boundaries, and how important it is for you not to be like, don't talk about her, I don't want to hear anything about her, I hate her, blah, blah, blah. So you don't just become another abusive person that's sort of pushing and pulling her in this sort of tug of war. But you are kind of setting some very clear boundaries, and you can say how you feel about this. You can say, I don't feel like this relationship is healthy. I don't feel like this is okay. I don't feel like she's good for you. It's unacceptable that she uses suicidal threats to manipulate you, and I don't want to hear anything about her. And those are things that are okay for you to say. You can set those firm boundaries. But you also need to make it very clear that you are there to support her if she's really scared or she needs it. The good thing is, hopefully she doesn't live with this girlfriend. If she does live with this girlfriend, it doesn't seem like that would be the case in this situation. Like, it seems like it's more likely that you would live with your partner, and then this girlfriend would kind of be not living with you. If she's living with you, that creates more complicated situations about leases, and then you may have to kind of think about a lawyer or finding a way to figure out what your legal recourse is here. Maybe if not a lawyer, then kind of like a renter's alliance or something like that. But you don't have to keep just putting on a smile. You can clearly set your boundaries, and it might be like in setting your boundaries that your girlfriend reacts very badly to that. She might be really, really upset by that. But you need to really remember what the alternative is here. The alternative is you, as you said, putting a smile on your face, the resentment growing and growing within you, you feeling angry, and then you just leaving. And apologies for the siren sound. You don't want to have to deal with the harm that this person is bringing in both of your lives, and you don't have to deal with it. She can. It's not necessarily that you're asking for a don't ask, don't tell situation where like you don't know that she's with someone else. You know that she's with someone else, but you don't need to hear about it. You don't need to, I have partners who date people. I have no idea what goes on. I don't know what goes on. I don't know about their partner. I don't need to know about any of that. And that's not necessarily because I've set those boundaries, but just because you can totally have a polyamorous relationship where you don't really know very much about your Metamours. Like, that is a thing. And it's not don't ask, don't tell. It's more like I didn't ask, so no one's telling. So you cannot ask, and also set that boundary of I don't want to know. If you don't want to be responsible for it, then that's kind of the best way you can go about it. I'd recommend as well, like, encouraging your girlfriend, if it's an option, to get therapy, because I do think a therapist is going to be someone who can really make her look at this situation and also advise her. You could even kind of suggest, based on the fact that this person is making suicidal threats, that your girlfriend go to a therapist for advice on how to deal with that, on how to best support the girlfriend. And it might be that through talking with this therapist has the not only the ability, because they're separate from the situation, but also the training and the understanding and the knowledge to be able to say, maybe you shouldn't be in this relationship, maybe it's psychological abuse, and maybe it's not good for you. That's kind of what therapy should do for people in general, is help them come to terms with things like that. But you cannot do that. You cannot be that therapist for her, unfortunately. And I don't think you should just cut your losses at this point, because it's also really, really important. The one thing that abusers do, and you'll figure this out as well through the book I recommended, is try to isolate their victims. So there's a reason why, and this is why it's a red flag, the reason why she's kind of picking at you and saying you're not enough, is that she wants you to get sick of it and leave so that she can have this person to herself, and then she isolates, and that kind of is how she's going to win. I wouldn't surprise me a single bit if she went to meet your girlfriend's family and started picking at that relationship too. And that might be another thing that you can reach out to, if family events are friendly gatherings, your mutual friends and your family banding together and just kind of making sure she doesn't basically feel like she has no one, because that's the worst situation. Like, it's so difficult for people in abusive relationships to leave their abuser, quite often because they're isolated, they have no other options. And if you give her options and her family gives her options, then that will help her. And I do also think as well, like, if you make sure her family, you give the book to her family, make sure her family understands the situation that she's in, then if at some point you feel like, you know what, I really can't continue, I've tried to put up these boundaries, because you need to also decide what you're going to do when those boundaries are crossed. You can't say, I have this boundary, and then someone keeps pushing up. If there's no consequences to someone violating your boundary that you've set, then, they're going to keep doing it. So you might have to really think about, okay, if I say I don't want to hear anything about this person, and then I keep getting pulled into the drama, then at some point I'm going to have to go. And that's okay. It's okay. I'm not saying like stay in this forever. But what I am saying is that if you have to enforce that boundary and leave, you can still say, I'm doing this because I don't want to be a part of this. I think it's unhealthy, but I'm always here for you if you need me. If you need to get away, I'm always here for you. If your girlfriend's living with you and the only other option is for her to move in with a girlfriend, then I would get help. Get help from her family. Like, hopefully her family isn't abusive or terrible, but her family need to know that she's in this situation, that she's, teetering on the precipice of being in a very abusive situation. And you can't be expected to sit around and pull her out of it, especially if you're also getting kind of the flack from this person. So her family can be that person to step in if you would decided, I can't deal with this more, I need to tap out, I need to go away for a while, I need to think. Her family may be the people who can come in, or your mutual friends, people who really care about her. Do not let this person chip away at her relationships, because if other people are around to ground your girlfriend and say, hey, this isn't okay, eventually she's going to realize it's not her responsibility to save someone from suicide. I know that's a really harsh thing to say, and I know that's a really difficult thing for a lot of people to deal with, but unfortunately there are people who are suicidal and who need help, and that's totally valid. And I think even when someone is threatening suicide as a cry for help, that's not necessarily a good reason to ignore their cry for help. They do need help. However, there are people who are abusive and who do use suicidal threats as a way to manipulate people, and that is not acceptable and not okay. And I do think that if that is happening to you or happening to anyone who's listening to this, then you setting your boundary of saying, not responding to that threat. I think people feel really bad about it because they think, well, then what if I'm responsible for that person committing suicide? And you're not responsible for that. And your girlfriend isn't responsible for that. And eventually she's going to be able to learn this, but it's going to take a little bit of time. So, to sum up everything, I think your girlfriend's in a very, very difficult situation. I think your gut instinct is right. Whether or not you like her is kind of irrelevant, and I wouldn't really bring that into any of your discussions. It's the fact that, she is making fun of your relationship and telling you you're not enough. Those are unacceptable things, and you shouldn't have to deal with those. But I do think it's really important for you to realize how difficult of a situation that your girlfriend is in, because if this partner is already using suicidal threats to manipulate her behavior, then it is psychological abuse. And, it's kind of hard for me to say at this point whether that's the case or whether this is a person who does genuinely need help and maybe isn't aware of their actions. Either way, her behavior isn't acceptable. And so you kind of have to recognize the complicated situation that you're in and the complicated situation that your girlfriend is in and be there to support your girlfriend. However, you are allowed to establish very firm boundaries about this. You don't have to be held personally responsible for this person for managing their mental health. You don't have to be personally responsible. You don't have to put up with insults. You can put those boundaries up. You can say, I don't want to have this person in my house. I don't want to be around them. I don't want to hear about them. You can put those firm boundaries up. It's going to be hard. It's going to sound harsh. Your girlfriend may not like it very much, but you are allowed to put those boundaries up. And then lastly, you need to really think about what you're going to do if and when those boundaries are crossed. It might be that as soon as you put these boundaries up and you outright blunt to her face say, I don't think this relationship is healthy. She's making fun of me and our relationship, saying I'm not enough, and she's using suicidal threats to manipulate you. And I think it's an abusive situation. And maybe if and when you say that, your girlfriend goes, oh crap, I didn't even realize that. Who knows? But you need to kind of think about the worst situation and decide what you're going to do if you do have those boundaries crossed and she doesn't respect that you don't want to hear about this person. You keep getting pulled back into this drama. And also, reach out to her family and mutual friends that you have and do your best to kind of, I'm not saying have an intervention, because I unless you get advice from a psychologist that's a good idea, I wouldn't necessarily say that's a good idea, but it's always good for those people, because people really don't understand it, and they get, they have someone in their life who's in an abusive situation. What they do is they demand that they leave that abusive person. The person doesn't do it, and they go, fine, you don't leave them, I'll leave. And that's what the abuser is hoping for, that everyone gets sick of it and leaves and abandons this person so that they have them all to themselves. So it's really, really important that even if you decide that you can't deal with being in a relationship anymore with her, and you want to take a step back and you want to, say, I'm done with this. However, if you ever need help in an emergency, call me. Or if there's a situation where, you have to get separate houses or you have to move out or something like that, that's a situation that potentially makes this way more complicated, because then the girlfriend can move in and she's kind of sinking the claws in even more if she is abusive, and it's not helpful. But that's why you need the family and mutual friends, because they should be able to step in and say, hey, come home and we'll stay with me and we'll talk about this. And they should be able to provide that support rather than her just leaning even more heavily on this person who doesn't sound very good for her. So yeah, that is what I think that is the best for you to do in this situation. I'm really, really sorry that you're having to deal with this. One last thing that I want to mention is that you mentioned that your girlfriend started to have feelings for someone else, and you decided that it was okay for you guys to have a polyamorous relationship for a short period of time. In the future, I think some people choose polyamory as an option so they don't have to break up, and I think that sometimes that works, but it really only works if both people understand what they get out of it. And I'm not really sure if you get anything out of this relationship being polyamorous. It just seems like your girlfriend had feelings for someone else and you agreed to it because the only other option was losing your girlfriend. And that's really, really unfortunate. But I do think that after this storm is blown over, you really need to think about if polyamory is actually even for you. Aside from this person that your partner's dating being a terrible human being, or sounds like at least, is polyamory something you actually want to do? Or is it just something you're doing for her? Because you say for a short period of time, but that's just not the way feelings work. And especially if what you are pursuing is polyamory, which is about multiple romantic relationships, which isn't about kind of something that would maybe be a short period of time, like sexual exploration or things like that. So you can't really you can put a stopper on the human heart, to be a bit sappy, but you really can't. You can't sort of say, well, okay, I'll let you have this relationship for a bit, but after 5 months, that's it. You might think that, and she may have agreed to that, but it's just not a realistic thing for any relationship. You can't kind of stop people from having feelings from people. And it's also kind of really harsh for, I mean, if you can imagine, I think you can put yourself into the shoes of someone who has feelings for someone, and then all of a sudden someone comes along and goes, well, that's it. It's not only, I mean, the sort of terrible actions of this person aside, it isn't really fair on either of them to just be like, well, that's it, you're done now, the time is up. You know, she may have agreed to that, but it's not very realistic, and I wouldn't have agreed to that in the beginning. I would have probably suggested that if she really wanted to date this other person, that she go about it. But I mean, it's kind of lucky in a way that she didn't, because you're at least there, and it doesn't sound like this relationship is good. And it might be that after this is blown over as well, she might want to figure out what it is about this person. Like, that's why I'm hoping her family isn't abusive. I'm hoping this isn't a pattern of her identifying behaviors that maybe she grew up around, and seeing them in other people and gravitating toward them because it's something she finds familiar. Hopefully that's not the case. But yeah, I think, you know, the deeper question about whether or not polyamory is for you or is serving you or is something you're actually interested in is something that you probably need to explore. But first, you know, set some boundaries around this and read the book, Why Does He Do That? It's a really, really good book. I feel like I should have an affiliate link at this point, but it's a really, really great book, and it opened my eyes to so many things, and also made me feel less helpless in a lot of these situations, and I think that's what you might need. And if you as well have the facilities to get a therapist to support you, please do so, because that will also help. So yeah, definitely put some boundaries up around this. And there are ways you can support her through this, but ultimately she has to make the decision to stop seeing this other person. Unfortunately, you cannot do that for her, as crappy as that is. All right, I hope this helps, and good luck. Thank you so much for listening to episode 23 of Non-Monogamy Help. And I want to say before you head off, just a reminder that if you want to be an amazing, awesome person who supports the columns and the podcast, which is just hugely appreciative, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/LolaPhoenix. Even if you only give $1 a month, it goes towards the cost of hosting the podcast, social media stuff, all kinds of things. And it's just in general kind of a nice reminder that people appreciate the column and the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. But if you want to be the most amazing person in the world, you can give $5 or more a month, and that means, with your permission, I'll read your name at the end of the podcast. And our current $5 patrons are Laura Boylan, Chris Alvery, Jones Juke, and James Wartell. Thank you so much to those folks, and your name can be added too. It's I know it's a huge, tantalizing reward to have your name read at the end of the podcast. That's a huge thing. I know it makes the day of all of the people. I'm just kidding. I'm being a bit of a jerk. Anyway, so yeah, that is episode 23. You'll get episode 24 next after next week, and you'll get a column next week. And yeah, send your questions to nonmonogamyhelp@gmail.com if you have any questions. And keep being awesome. Keep listening. We're on Spotify. Another thing I should say, if you have even just 5 minutes, going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a 5 stars and a review, or you can just leave 5 stars. That's really, really appreciative and kind of boosts me up in the rankings. So if you have 5 minutes, please go do that. Hugely helpful. All right. Thank you so much for listening this week, and you've been listening to Non-Monogamy Help. Our podcast music has been provided by Chris Albery Jones at albery-jones.com, and the art was made by Dom Jung at domduong.com. Thank you for listening.